And hello everyone, and welcome into a continuation, I should say, part 2 of episode 17 now of Matt Sports Talk, where I'm previewing the upcoming selection show for the national tournament that's coming up tonight at 7 p.m. So obviously it's getting exciting, and I'm doing a preview, if you will, or a prediction, more so a prediction of what I think will happen. I mentioned in my last video that I have Huntington out of Indiana, the Huntington Lady Foresters, as the very last team that gets in to the national tournament at 17 and 12. And in that video, I talked about how Northwestern out of Orange City, Iowa, as well as Carroll out of Montana, and Spring Arbor out of Michigan. I have all three of those teams being among the first four out, in my opinion. And again, I've really based that off of all of their strength of schedule, which between those between those four teams, Huntington is higher up in the strength of schedule. So obviously, I think that's going to make a big difference. So I want to talk now about the ARC rankings. Now, when you talk about the national tournament, you really focus on not just the RPI. The RPI really in particular, where Huntington's ranked 52nd in the RPI, and Spring Arbor, I believe, is ranked 50th. So now we talk about the ARC ratings, and this is the other major factor that the committee not the committee, but I guess I should say what the selection committee looks at. So let's look at the ARC ratings. Now, in terms of teams that are for sure out of the Great Lakes / South, Campbellsville out of Kentucky, they're ranked first in the RPI, first in the ARC, so obviously they're for sure in. Iowa was ranked second in the ARC. They, I believe, are ranked third or fifth actually in the RPI. I can't remember which one, and I literally just looked at the RPI a couple of minutes ago. Freed-Hardman's ranked fourth in the ARC. They're among the top 7 in the RPI. Bethel out of Tennessee is fifth in the ARC. They are third in the RPI, and a big reason for that is Bethel out of Tennessee ran their conference tournament in the Mid-South. Marion out of Indiana, the Knights, are 6th in the ARC. Georgetown out of Kentucky is ranked 7th. St. Francis Cougars out of Fort Wayne, Indiana, 8th. Rio Grande out of Portsmouth, Ohio, 9th. Shawnee State, also in the Portsmouth area, 10th. Indiana Tech is ranked 11th. Now, when you get down to some of these teams, you look at all these teams and where they are in the national tournament. Campbellsville is a for sure lock. They won the regular season in the Mid-South. Iowa's a for sure lock. They won the regular season and the Crossroads League Tournament Championship. Cumberland's out of Kentucky. They're for sure in for an at-large because the Mid-South is extremely competitive. Freed-Hardman, also in the Mid-South Conference, they're for sure in for an at-large. Bethel out of Tennessee, also out of the Mid-South Conference, is a for sure lock for an automatic bid because they won their conference tournament. Marion out of Indiana, for sure in out of the Crossroads League for the second automatic bid because of Iowa winning both the regular season and conference tournament championship. Georgetown out of Kentucky, also in the Mid-South, they're ranked 7th in the ARC. They're for sure in for an at-large bid. St. Francis out of Indiana, ranked 9th in the country. They're for sure in for an at-large bid out of the Crossroads League. Then Rio Grande out of Portsmouth, they're for sure in. They're ranked 9th in the ARC. They're locked in because they won their conference tournament championship. Shawnee State, also out of Ohio, ranked 10th in the ARC. They're for sure in because they won their conference tournament. They won their conference tournament. Or not the conference tournament. Shawnee State won the regular season, I should say. Indiana Tech ranked 11th in the ARC. They won the regular season. They're for sure in. This is where it gets really interesting. Who's ranked 12th, 13th, and 14th in the ARC? And now I will say the team that's ranked 15th in the ARC is Lourdes out of Ohio. They were the 7th seed in the WAC Conference Tournament Championship. They upset a lot of teams in that conference tournament, ran the entire thing. So Lourdes is for sure in via an automatic bid because they ran their conference tournament. So out of the 15 teams, or out of the teams that are ranked inside the top 15 in the ARC, there 13 out of the 15, or 12 out of the 15 are for sure into the national tournament via an at-large bid or automatic. 3 teams, on the other hand, are where it really gets interesting. And I wanted to talk for just a minute about that. First things first, and this is where I talked in my last video about the RPI rankings. I mentioned Northwestern out of Iowa. I have them among the first 4 out, in my opinion, because I know they play in a tough conference, but they don't have any good quality wins. They have some bad losses. They are actually ranked 10th. Excuse me. They're ranked 10th. Yeah, they're ranked 10th in the North Central United States in their ARC. So being ranked 10th, I mean, that's not too terribly bad, but you look at the teams that are either ahead of them or behind them that for sure will be in. And for Northwestern, all the teams ahead of them definitely will be in the national tournament, talking about Olivet Nazarene, as well as, in my opinion, IU Northwest, St. Francis of Illinois, Dakota Wesleyan, Governor State, Dakota State, Hastings, Briarcliff, and Dordt. So literally everybody ahead of Northwestern is for sure in. The 2 teams below them, in my opinion, will not be in. And then you look at these 3 teams in the Crossroads League. You have Lindsey Wilson. I talked about them. They're ahead of Huntington in the RPI, despite being 16 and 13. They are 1 spot ahead of Huntington in the ARC, ranked 12th. Huntington's ranked 13th, and then Spring Arbor is 14th. I mentioned Spring Arbor. I think Spring Arbor is among the first 4 out. Now, even though Spring Arbor is ahead of Huntington in the RPI, they are 1 spot below them in the ARC. So I don't think, in my opinion, that Spring Arbor has enough to make it, even though they do have 1 quality win. For Lindsey Wilson, they play an extremely tough conference. So Lindsey Wilson's the most interesting team. Now, I think based on the ARC, and again, and this is just a prediction, I think in the ARC, based on off the ARC alone, and maybe even the RPI, although more so the ARC, I would say that Lindsey Wilson and Huntington will be the final 2 teams getting that at-large, the final 2 spots for at-large bids, and meaning that Spring Arbor and Northwestern will be among the first 4 out. I mentioned that in my last video when I talked about the RPI and talked about the strength of schedule numbers. Now remember, Lindsey Wilson is ahead of Huntington by 9 spots in the strength of schedule, so that does help them a little bit, I guess I should say. But again, I don't know. I mean, I really think that Lindsey Wilson and Huntington are going to get the final 2 at-large spots, at least in my personal opinion and prediction, based off the ARC and based off the RPI. Now, based off the ARC alone, I think Huntington is definitely in ahead of Spring Arbor, and I think Huntington's definitely in ahead of Spring Arbor as well in the RPI because of Huntington's strength of schedule being 12 and Spring Arbor's being all the way down to 28th. So again, there's a lot to uncover here. We're going to have all those questions, or we're going to have all those answers to these questions here in about 5.5 hours from now, since it's just below 1:30 Eastern time, and of course the selection show is at 7 p.m. tonight. So that's a little bit. Now again, I mentioned in my last video, I don't really understand, how the ARC and the RPI works in more specific details, but I do know that those two things are two really important areas that the NAIA Selection Show Committee looks at when determining the teams that get into the national tournament. So I hope that this video was super helpful to you. We're going to see what happens tonight. I'll be recording videos tomorrow talking about the men's and the women's upcoming matchups, at least out of the Crossroads League teams that made the national tournament. I'll be doing all of that tomorrow for both the men and the women in 2 separate videos, so make sure that you stay tuned for that. And if you did enjoy this video, please either like, comment, or subscribe. Any one of those options helps me out greatly. I appreciate you so much for, excuse me, I thank you so much for watching. Have a great and blessed rest of your day, and God bless.